It seems that the current buzzword in the field of educational technology is the one-to-one movement. This notion pairs students with individual access to internet computing devices. At first thought, it would seem that this should be a huge priority for educational institutions and agencies across the United States, as the country currently operates well within the 21st century. Might I add, in the middle of a technological boom that has commandeered virtually every aspect of society. This is especially vital as the educational achievement of the United States on an international level is already lagging behind other industrialized nations. This is illustrated in a 2009 comparison of 15-year-olds across the world that were evaluated in the areas of reading, math, and science. In the study, the United States ranked in the middle of 34 industrialized countries, 14th in reading, 17th in science, and 25th in mathematics. Countries that led the list focused their curriculum largely on critical thinking, problem solving, and real-world investigations. Arguably, the solution would be to provide students with technology to increase their capacity to forego rudimentary skills and focus on higher levels of thinking. However, before districts across the United States jump into this movement blindly, there are multiple areas of concern which could have the opposing effect of the original intention of maximizing the educational system. This notion is precisely what Gwen Solomon presents in her 2002 paper, Digital Equity: It's Not Just About Access Anymore. She trumpets the need for education to improve student competency in the areas of research, comprehension, and application. Solomon further investigates the driving systemic aspects that contribute to the widening divide between digital natives. At the heart of her examination is the statistically grounded statement that the digital divide is exacerbated by poverty. This podcast will highlight the unintended influence of technology in fostering the growth of the digital divide between the haves and the have-nots of society. If education is trumpeted as the great equalizer among social classes, regardless of socioeconomic status, how then is it theoretically applied in the digital realm as part of the one-to-one movement? Digital equity is, in simple terms, equality for all students to have adequate access to information and communications technologies for learning and for preparing, regardless of socioeconomic status, physical disability, language, race, gender, or any other characteristic that may have been linked with unequal treatment. The initial problem emerges in the definition. It only highlights that students have equal access. The reason for the growing inequalities between learners and districts is not access, rather, it's technological pedagogy. In a 2004 study, Technology and Equity in Schooling, Deconstructing the Digital Divide, it was found in a local examination of 8 schools, 5 low SES and 3 high SES, in the greater Los Angeles area, that the computer-to-internet ratios within the schools were strikingly similar. The computer ratio in the low SES building was 4.2 compared to 5.2 in the high SES. Yet the study unearths that the high SES schools were achieving at higher levels. Why? Solomon claims that the low SES schools use computers for lower order skills, while economically advantaged students are able to use computers for higher order activities. The Technology and Equity in School article echoed this notion as they statistically broke down how content was being disseminated. The study unearthed that high SES schools use computers to carry out aspects such as statistical analysis, advanced planning, and collaborative editing, whereas low SES institutions were using technology for rudimentary processes. Comparing schools on a level of technological pedagogy provides insight into the unintended consequences of technology integration. Teachers need to turn their attention away from mastery of software programs and turn their attention towards using technology as a means for scholarship, research, and inquiry. By redirecting the educational focus towards challenging learning experiences, students are, in the long term, better prepared to compete and succeed in our information-based world. This is because the educational framework and curricular focus is concentrated on higher order relevant application. The positive byproduct of fostering more qualitative learning is that today's students will have the necessary skill sets and mentalities to solve problems that our society isn't even aware exist yet. Digital equity requires overcoming a host of barriers to provide equal treatment for all learners. Essentially, what we're trying to do is bridge the gap between the haves and the have-nots. There's no question that educators have the greatest impact for the educational system's ultimate end product, the student. However, the greatest agents of change cannot succeed in a vacuum. In order to bridge the digital divide, the system requires outside support from influential, enlightened parties such as policymakers, administration, and parents. Leaders should have, at minimum, a thorough forecasted vision of how technology is going to augment current instruction. Keep in mind, technology is the supplement, not the end-all, solve-all to education. Solomon states that any movement that is going to integrate technology must require policy, budgeting and financing, and other organizational mechanisms in order for increased longevity and success. Within this vision, there also needs to be a component for teacher support systems. The National Council for Education Statistics concluded that 80% of teachers feel ill-prepared to integrate educational technology. Additionally, the 2004 study previously mentioned outlined that all of the schools examined provided no pedagogical support for teachers. These are huge problems. Using technology to target different levels of thinking also has an unintended side effect, as it provides a false sense of how technology should be integrated into the classroom. Technology unintentionally facilitates incorrect, inefficient, or outdated applications for future experiences. In a recent technology survey conducted by CDWG, it outlined that 75% of teachers report that they regularly use technology, whereas 40% of the students reported the presence of technology usage in the classroom. Additionally, 94% of students reported in the same survey outlined using technology to do their homework, while 46% of teachers stated that they incorporated technology into the original homework assignment. The bottom line is that today's students are digital natives, operating in an outdated traditional instructional model. There's no question that students have the capacity to learn in a digital world. The problem is, are school districts facilitating it? The key to effective implementation involves empowering individuals, schools, and communities to adapt technology to work towards their socially agreed upon vision. This is especially vital for teachers. Statistics showed that schools with significantly larger concentrations of lower income students spent a smaller portion of their technology funds on teacher training and support than their wealthier counterparts. Interesting enough, the notion of infusing technological supports actually works. The Software and Information Industry Association conducted a survey that concluded that students who had teachers who had 10 hours of technology training significantly outperformed students who attended classes by teachers who had 5 or fewer hours of training. Technology can make an impressive impact and really contribute to breaking the cycle of poverty. It cannot do this, however, if it is simply handed down to teachers and they, in turn, are directed to use it without proper instruction and support. This approach does not advance education. It instead chips away at its very foundation and ultimately expands the divide between students. Without adequate support, technology can be extremely dangerous and hasten the growth of inequalities, especially if it is used inappropriately. There's no question that schools reflect their community. This is true economically and culturally. These two aspects are influential in attracting quality in leadership and instruction. Teachers in low SES environments typically lack full credentials and have on average fewer years of experience. These teachers also teach a student population that has on average a higher rate of absenteeism and considered below grade level with scores in English and mathematics. I don't suspect that some of the most successful teachers are trying to get into these schools. Poverty affects the quality of students because their focus may not be on education. Rather, it may be concentrated on basic survival or other reasons. Poverty also impacts teachers in these arenas. Poorly qualified teachers are more likely not to know how to use technology themselves, and for technology to be successful, it must have properly trained teachers. Therefore, students in economically distressed areas are not necessarily withheld from available technologies, but more so are restricted from effective application. Educational technology presents a complex conundrum. On one hand, it can be the acting catalyst for breaking the cycle of poverty and closing the gap in the digital divide. And on the other, it can amplify existing forms of inequality. This discussion and podcast are not meant to be a self-righteous critique of the field of education. Rather, they're meant to echo the selected readings and draw attention to the detrimental effects of placing internet computing devices in a low SES setting in order to fulfill digital equity. Just providing access to computers does little to address serious educational challenges faced by these schools. Access to equipment is not enough. Teachers need to be supported to develop a high degree of expertise in technological pedagogy. All parties involved in the educational system should use existing resources to develop the skill sets that are universally applicative to future problems. Just having